Welcome back to another episode of Alchemy Online. This week, we are playing with paints. We're gonna be talking about using some different stencils to create a custom board graphic, and we're gonna show you all the steps along the way. So, grab yourself a comfortable seat, maybe a snack, and let's go make something cool. So what we're doing today is prepping a graphic to put on board that a participant in our Metals program has designed and picked out. Before we paint any of our boards, we always do an artist proof. That is where we get to test it out on paper, make sure we like our layout, troubleshoot any things that might go wrong, because we don't want to mess up on the board. So the basic supplies that you would need if you're going to do some stencil art is some nice cardstock to paint on, and then of course some spray paint, whatever color palette you're going to be using for your graphic. And then lastly, we are using a combination of different stencils. So I've gone ahead and prepared this stencil for us with the image that you selected, and we're gonna do a combination of different effects. So the other tools you might need, an X-Acto blade is great for making your stencil. You're essentially tracing out the areas of the image you wanna remove. And then we've also got some general painter's tape and some extra paper to cover off the areas we don't wanna paint. Now that we've got all of our supplies ready, we're gonna start off by doing a basic color fade for our background. It's gonna be a night sky scene, so we're gonna do a black to red color fade, drop some clouds in, and we want a big moon in our image. So we're gonna start off layering in that moon right now. So for our night sky scene, order of operations is important. So we're gonna lay some color down for our moon. That's gonna be the first thing we do. Our moon in our mock-up is kind of a white beige with a little bit of pink. And so to do a good planet or moon texture, we're gonna use some glossy paper. This is left over from the back of some grip tape, and we're gonna crumple it up. We're gonna use this to help create that varied pattern and texture in our moon scene. So crumple it up. Magazine paper works great as well, but again, you want something semi-glossy that's gonna smudge that paint instead of absorbing it. So for our moon, we're gonna start with a big blob of color. So we're working wet paint on wet paint. The colors we want layering back and forth, making sure we're putting enough color bigger than the size of our moon. And we're gonna use that crinkled up paper, lay it on there and give it a little smear. And we've got some texture for our moon. We're gonna go ahead and soften some of that by adding a little bit more of that beige around one side, kind of like a highlight. And next, we're gonna let this dry. I'm gonna be using a heat gun to speed up our process here. Otherwise, you can literally sit and watch paint dry right now. Before you move on to the next step, make sure that your first layers are completely dry to the touch, otherwise it's not gonna work. Once we're happy with our moon texture, we're gonna take a round form. I'm using just a roll of tape that I've covered over, and we are gonna set that right where we want our moon to be as we add in our next color layers. Again, I mentioned process is important, so start with your planet or your moon, and now we're gonna add in that color gradient for our night sky. And again, we want a color fade, so I'm working from the top down with my dark colors and layering my lighter reds and pinks over top of them, trying to get a smooth transition. We don't want hard lines for our sky. The further away you pull your can, the more we're gonna be dusting rather than painting hard, heavy colors. So practice going forward and back, adjusting the angle of your can as you go. And don't be afraid to experiment with different colors. Throw a little purple in, throw a little pink in. Paint. You can always add more if you don't like what you've done. Our next step, now that we've got our color fade, is to add some stars because we want a nighttime scene. So, two methods that we use to put our stars on. One is very light dustings, keeping the can far away from our canvas so that little flecks fall on it. The second method we're gonna do is spraying some glue in our hand with a glove and flecking them on there. So we can add as many stars as we want to this image by doing those two different techniques. And we want these stars to be behind the clouds, and that's why we're putting them on before we do that next step. So again, play around with the different techniques, spattering some paint, dropping little dustings, little clusters, some Milky Way galaxies, and I recommend using more than one color for your stars. Alternating between light yellows and whites is gonna give us some more variety and a little more depth. This next step, we want to add some clouds into our sky scene, and so I'm going to freehand a general shape of the cloud using that X-Acto knife. It doesn't have to be incredibly detailed or specific, just generally channeling my Bob Ross. There are no mistakes, there's only happy accidents. Some fluffy, nimbulous clouds. I believe my life sciences teacher would be proud if I said that right. So there is our basic cloud. To apply our clouds, we're going to use the top half of our image because we want the cloud to represent that space below. And we're just going to set it willy-nilly on our canvas. And because they're clouds, we don't need a hard line. So play around with it, move them around as you do, and we're going to play around with some different colors as well, getting some different cloud shapes from the same basic template. Because again, we're moving them around, and I'm doing just the basic pink first, and we're gonna come in and add some more color here. I think that's all the clouds we want. So we've got our clouds, we've got our stars, and we're gonna go ahead and move our form off of our moon and see what we get. The final step of our graphic now is to apply the image that our participant picked out. I went ahead of time and cut out this stencil using the X-Acto knife, and there's some details in here that were going to be really difficult to cut out, and so we're going to use a combination of stencil and then freehanding those last little details at the very end. What we like to use for our stencils is the 3M Super 77 glue. We spray just a little bit on the back of our stencil so that it adheres firmly and doesn't lift up when we're painting, but we don't want to permanently glue this piece of paper to our piece, so again, lightly dust the back of your stencil. It even looks sweet in the reverse like that. So we've got our stencil down, and I just want the telephone pole to bleed all the way down off of our image. So I am using tape to continue the line of that telephone pole down and off the page. And the last thing we'll need to do before we start blasting it with paint is we want this to be very clean. We want to avoid overspray. The better you get with your cans, you could go in and freehand it, but again, I don't want to risk any overspray, so we're going to take some of our scratch paper and we are just going to cover up all of the borders where we don't want any of that potential overspray. Our stencil is laid out and ready to go. We've covered out all of the boundaries that we don't want overspray on, so now what we're going to do is apply our paint. When you're working with stencils, especially if they have fine detail, resist the urge to click and blast it. You want to build this paint up a little more slowly so that it doesn't smudge or get under the edges of our stencil. So much like we did with our fade, you want to be dusting that paint onto there, letting it slowly fill up that surface area rather than getting close and blasting it. So our stencil's turned out, we're happy with it. We're gonna go ahead and now with a paint pen and just add those final little details that would have been way more work to cut into our stencil. So I've got my reference image next to me, and we're gonna go ahead and just add all those extra little wires off of the telephone pole to wrap this project up. So we've got our finished artist proof, and what we're gonna do this week during our medals program is we're gonna share this with the participant whose design idea it was, see if there's anything they want to adjust or change, and then we're gonna do that same exact process but directly onto his skateboard, at which point, once it's dry, we're gonna do a hefty dose of clear coat over it to protect that graphic and get it really solidly attached to the board. And then he'll have a rideable skateboard that he has shaped, picked out his own graphic, and it'll be a true one-of-one custom for that participant. And this is something you guys can do at home on your own as well. So get out there, play arts and crafts, have a great time. We'll see you next time.